NASA has decided that Butch and Sonny will return with Crew 9 next February.
Boeing Starliner has let us down yet again. This didn't faze Elon Musk, the maverick and entrepreneur behind SpaceX. He was right about the Boeing project all along. Will Musk step in to help? How is he going to demonstrate that SpaceX is now the more technologically advanced and dominant player in space exploration? Let's take a look at these rivals in the controversial world of spacecrafts, Boeing's golden age and the root of its decline. It's hard to believe that Boeing could make such a big mistake when you consider their history. They've been around forever, right? For years, Boeing was the company everyone trusted to build things that flew, from airplanes to spacecraft. They were the top dog in aerospace innovation. But then came the Starliner fiasco, and suddenly all that shiny metal didn't seem so impressive anymore. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's take a moment to remember what Boeing was like during their heyday. Boeing was well known for building aircraft. They played a big part in building the rocket that took people to the moon, the space shuttle, and parts of the International Space Station. People had faith in Boeing to spearhead the next phase of space exploration. But then, Boeing hit a few snags with the Starliner project. Boeing was there right at the height of NASA's achievements and innovations in space exploration. Boeing helped develop the Space Shuttle program by contributing to different parts of the shuttle's construction and design. On top of that, Boeing helped put together parts for the International Space Station and built some of the most important American modules for the station to work with. Boeing also played a part in developing the Delta IV rocket, which has been used on space missions. This shows that they have a strong track record in space technology and exploration. At the time, it was only natural to put your trust in them when it came to the future of space exploration. After NASA chose Boeing to lead their Crew program, it was a decision that didn't surprise many. Boeing was known as the reliable choice, the one you could count on due to their track record of successful outcomes. Even though there had been a shift in their performance over time, they were still the safe choice. As things progressed, it became clear that this wasn't the same Boeing that had played a role in sending astronauts to the moon. This particular Boeing is a different kettle of fish. That's when things really started to get interesting. Merger with McDonnell Douglas. If we look back, we can see that there were some warning signs. Boeing's problems started long before the Starliner issues, with their 1997 acquisition of McDonnell Douglas. While it seemed like a smart move at the time, paying $14 billion for their competitor had a hidden cost. It changed the core identity of Boeing. Before the merger with McDonnell Douglas, Boeing was an engineer-driven company. Safety and quality were their top priorities. But McDonnell Douglas brought a more corporate focus on profits and shareholder value. This change in culture slowly started to chip away at Boeing's long-standing focus on engineering excellence. It's been said that McDonnell Douglas effectively bought Boeing with Boeing's own money, which is a pretty wry observation that shows how this merger really changed the company's values and priorities. The merger with McDonnell Douglas gradually eroded Boeing's engineering-centric culture. The company's focus shifted from creating amazing aircraft and spacecraft to cutting costs and pleasing shareholders. Once they were at the top of their game, engineers were pushed out and the company's standards fell. This wasn't obvious at first, but it led to problems like the Starliner fiasco. The company that used to be all about cutting-edge innovation and safety had become compromised by a focus on the bottom line. Let's talk about the Starliner project. Boeing's having a rough time. The Starliner project, which started in 2010 as part of NASA's Commercial Crew program, has had a series of setbacks that mirrored a cultural shift within Boeing. Boeing, a giant in the aerospace industry, seemed like a natural choice for the job of developing a new spacecraft to ferry astronauts to the International Space Station. Boeing was initially given $18 million by NASA to get the job done by 2015. However, this proved to be a bit ambitious. Deadlines were missed and requests for extensions were made. By 2015, the test flight was still not ready and had been pushed back to 2017, and then again to 2019. This raised some pretty serious concerns. What was causing these delays? Where was the Boeing that we all know and love for getting those complex projects like the lunar rover and the space shuttle done on time and to such high standards? It's fair to ask why NASA kept giving Boeing extensions. Boeing operated under advantageous cost-plus contracts for years, which meant they could bill the government for all expenses plus a fee. This meant they profited more the more they spent. This system didn't encourage efficiency or timeliness, but the Starliner contract was different. It was a fixed-price agreement, so Boeing was responsible for any cost overruns, which directly impacted their profits. This change in financial structure showed that Boeing's approach had flaws. They were used to operating with a blank check, so they now faced constraints. The leadership, still influenced by the McDonnell-Douglas mindset, prioritized cost-cutting above all else. This strategy was bad for a complex endeavor like spacecraft development. By the time Starliner took off on its uncrewed test flight in December 2019, it was clear that these decisions were going to have consequences. This test, which was meant to show that Boeing was still leading the way in aerospace, actually showed that there were problems with their system. The first test flight of the Starliner was a complete failure. A basic mistake, an incorrectly set clock, meant the whole mission was off course. This meant Starliner couldn't keep track of its mission timeline, and instead of heading towards the International Space Station, ended up going off course. While Boeing eventually found the issue, it was too late to fix the mission. Starliner had already used too much fuel, so the mission had to be aborted. To make matters worse, another software bug was found just 2 hours before re-entry. This bug could have caused thruster misfires, which would have led to a catastrophic collision between the crew capsule and the service module. Thankfully, this was resolved in time, but it was a very public close call. Despite Starliner's safe return to Earth, Boeing's reputation was damaged. This incident showed the risks of cutting costs without paying enough attention to engineering. Let's compare the Starliner with SpaceX. The difference in approach and setbacks. It's worth noting that Boeing wasn't the only company involved in NASA's Commercial Crew Program. NASA also teamed up with a newer, more agile company, SpaceX. This created a great rivalry between the established giant and the ambitious newcomer. As you might have guessed, the newcomer came out on top. In 2014, NASA split its commercial crew contracts between Boeing and SpaceX. This initially seemed like a good idea. Boeing, the seasoned veteran with lots of experience in the aerospace industry, versus SpaceX, the ambitious newcomer with innovative ideas but limited experience in human spaceflight. It seemed like a smart move to bet on both established expertise and fresh innovation. Boeing got a big $4.2 billion contract for Starliner, while SpaceX got a smaller $2.6 billion contract for their Crew Dragon capsule. Most people thought that Boeing, with its history and experience, would get the job done faster and more efficiently. But in the end, SpaceX came out on top. So why did that happen? The difference in culture, these two companies went in different directions because of their different ways of doing things. Boeing stuck with the tried and true, while SpaceX went in a completely different direction. One of the main reasons for the difference was their respective cultures. At SpaceX, the engineers are still in charge, and they're inspired by Elon Musk's vision. Musk, who's known for pushing boundaries, created a culture where innovation wasn't just encouraged but expected. SpaceX saw failure not as a disaster to be avoided, but as a chance to learn. This mindset allowed for quick changes, embracing mistakes and fixing them quickly. This agile approach was very different from Boeing's more cautious approach, which helped SpaceX catch up in the race to develop a reliable and efficient spacecraft. It's a fast-paced, agile culture that encourages quick iterations, experimentation, and learning from mistakes. Engineers are encouraged to take risks and think outside the box, which makes for a really innovative environment. On the other hand, Boeing was held back by its corporate culture, which put shareholder interest before daring engineering projects. This way of thinking stuck with Starliner throughout its development. The decisions that were made were driven by money rather than engineering, which was a bad move in the space exploration industry. Sometimes, traditional, hierarchical, corporate structures with a focus on established processes and risk aversion can lead to slower decision-making and a reluctance to embrace radical innovation. Astronaut Doug Hurley has worked with both Boeing and SpaceX, so he's seen this contrast firsthand. He said that working with SpaceX engineers was a great experience. They were open and adaptable, and they listened to feedback from astronauts. In stark contrast, he found that Boeing engineers were overconfident, didn't listen to astronaut feedback, and were resistant to change. This difference in approach marked the beginning of Boeing's decline in the space race. It shows how important it is to have an agile and responsive engineering culture, to achieve ambitious goals. By 2020, SpaceX had reached a major milestone, launching its first crewed mission to the International Space Station. This was a big win for NASA and the US, restoring the country's ability to send astronauts to the ISS independently after years of relying on Russian spacecraft. The Demo 2 mission was a complete success. SpaceX had delivered on its promises, exceeding NASA's expectations. Elon Musk had shown that SpaceX was more than just an ambitious startup. It was a force to be reckoned with in the aerospace industry. This showed just how powerful innovation, agility, and a willingness to take risks can be, and how they helped SpaceX to outpace its more established competitor. While SpaceX was doing well, Boeing was still struggling with the development of the Starliner. The 2019 test flight issues led to a rethink, but there were further problems. In 2021, a launch attempt was thwarted by malfunctioning fuel valves, causing another setback and delaying the project even further. As SpaceX celebrated the success of the Crew Dragon, there was a bit of a blame game going on between Boeing and Aerojet Rocketdyne, the thruster manufacturer, over the faulty valves. This public disagreement between two major aerospace companies did little to inspire confidence in Boeing's ability to deliver. In 2022, even though Starliner finally reached orbit and docked with the ISS, it still had more thruster problems. The mission was completed, but the numerous issues showed that the company was struggling to maintain control. This was in stark contrast to SpaceX's seemingly effortless progress. While Boeing was struggling to overcome setbacks, SpaceX was already setting its sights on ambitious goals, like a human mission to Mars. The gap between the two companies had become a chasm, highlighting the consequences of Boeing's cultural and operational challenges. SpaceX had become NASA's go-to partner for crewed missions, and Boeing's reputation was in tatters. Faced with the uncertainty of Starliner's thruster issues, NASA prioritized astronaut safety and made the difficult call to return Wilmore and Williams to Earth on SpaceX's Crew Dragon instead. This decision was a humbling blow to Boeing, exposing their struggles to deliver a reliable spacecraft capable of safely transporting astronauts. It further emphasized the growing disparity between the two companies, SpaceX consistently achieving success with Crew Dragon, and Boeing plagued by ongoing technical problems with Starliner. NASA's choice solidified SpaceX's dominance in commercial human spaceflight, leaving Boeing to confront the repercussions of its shortcomings. How did it come to this? As we've seen, Boeing's struggles ultimately stem from a deep-rooted cultural shift. The company's once unwavering commitment to engineering excellence had been eroded by a focus on cost-cutting and shareholder appeasement. This transformation, initiated decades ago with the McDonnell-Douglas merger, has now reached its full and troubling manifestation. Let's get into the specific reasons why Starliner failed just when it was needed the most. The June 2024 Starliner mission thrusters threw NASA and Boeing a curveball. While the initial assessment pointed towards heat-induced expansion of Teflon seals in the oxygen valves, the inconsistency of the issue was baffling. These thrusters had performed flawlessly in previous missions, and perplexingly, the problem proved elusive in subsequent tests aboard the ISS. This lack of definitive answers placed Boeing in a precarious position. Without a clear understanding of the root cause, guaranteeing the thrusters' reliability for the critical re-entry phase was impossible. For NASA, the stakes were simply too high. Astronaut safety was paramount, and the potential consequences of thruster failure during re-entry were unthinkable. This wasn't a minor software bug. It was a life-or-death situation with no room for error. The June 2024 Starliner mission left NASA and Boeing grappling with a perplexing anomaly: malfunctioning thrusters. While the culprit appeared to be heat-related expansion of Teflon seals within the oxygen valves, the inconsistency of the issue was deeply troubling. These thrusters had operated without a hitch in prior missions, and further testing on the ISS yielded no definitive answers. This confusion placed Boeing in a problematic position. Without a clear understanding of the root cause, guaranteeing a safe return for the crew was impossible. NASA, prioritizing astronaut safety above all else, made the difficult decision to postpone the return flight indefinitely. This meant an extended stay aboard the ISS for astronauts Wilmore and Williams, far beyond their planned mission duration. Williams and Wilmore were selected to be the first astronauts to fly on Boeing's Starliner spacecraft as part of its crew flight test. Their mission was to test the spacecraft's capabilities and paved the way for future crewed missions to the ISS. However, due to the technical issues experienced during the mission, their stay on the ISS was extended significantly, and they ultimately returned to Earth on SpaceX's Crew Dragon. Despite the challenges they faced, Williams and Wilmore demonstrated professionalism and resilience throughout the mission. Their experience and expertise were invaluable in managing the unexpected situation and contributing to the ongoing efforts to improve the safety and reliability of human spaceflight. While the Starliner issues caused significant disruption and inconvenience, the astronauts were never in a life-threatening situation. The ISS and its support systems ensured their survival and well-being throughout their extended stay. Despite the mounting uncertainty, Boeing maintained a facade of confidence, publicly assuring everyone that Starliner was safe and capable of returning the crew at any moment. Behind the scenes, however, the reality was far less reassuring. Boeing engineers were scrambling to diagnose the problem, while NASA remained unconvinced of Starliner's readiness for a crewed re-entry. By August 2024, the root cause was finally identified. The Teflon seals in the thruster valves were indeed overheating and expanding, restricting oxidizer flow and triggering thruster shutdowns. While this provided some clarity, it failed to explain why this issue hadn't surfaced earlier. To this day, Boeing lacks a definitive answer. Adding to Boeing's woes, NASA, still unconvinced of Starliner's safety, opted to return the spacecraft to Earth without its crew. This decision, a stark admission of the program's struggles, not only dealt a significant blow to Boeing's reputation, but also disrupted NASA's carefully planned flight schedule. Here's why this situation was a major headache for NASA. SpaceX's Crew Dragon to the rescue. Wilmore and Williams, stranded on the ISS due to Starliner's issues, needed a ride home. The only viable option was SpaceX's Crew Dragon. However, Crew Dragon wasn't designed to accommodate 2 extra passengers. To bring the stranded astronauts back, NASA had to bump 2 astronauts from the next scheduled Crew Dragon flight, resulting in a mission with 2 empty seats. This wasn't a mere inconvenience, it was a logistical nightmare. It disrupted NASA's meticulously planned flight schedule, impacting future missions and creating a ripple effect of delays and complications. All of this stemmed from Boeing's failure to deliver on its promises. And this ultimately is the crux of the Starliner saga. A story of unfulfilled potential, technical setbacks, and the far-reaching consequences of a company struggling to keep pace with the evolving demands of space exploration. The ensuing strain not only showcased the resilience of space agencies in managing crises, but also highlighted SpaceX's increasing indispensability to NASA's operations. The need for reliable alternatives became evident, accelerating discussions about redundancy and flexibility in spacecraft design and mission planning. This episode demonstrated the intertwined destinies of commercial space firms and national space agendas, reshaping the landscape of orbital logistics. Boeing's symptoms. Boeing's problems with the Starliner spacecraft were not just caused by technical issues, but also by their inability to adapt to the changing needs of the space industry. While other companies like SpaceX were thriving by embracing innovation, Boeing was stuck in the past. In 2024, Boeing was facing a difficult situation. The future of Starliner was uncertain, and the company's reputation had suffered. NASA was questioning whether they could rely on Boeing, and Boeing's financial situation was not good. Boeing had 2 options. They could cancel the Starliner program or continue to invest in it. Both options had risks. Canceling would stop the financial bleeding, but would also mean losing a government contract. Continuing to invest in Starliner was risky because there was no guarantee that it would succeed. Additionally, the International Space Station was scheduled to be decommissioned soon, which would limit the market for sending astronauts to low Earth orbit. The predicament pushed Boeing into a corner, forcing a reevaluation of its strategic priorities in aerospace. The potential decommissioning of the ISS intensified the urgency to innovate or risk obsolescence within the industry.